A man in a perfectly tailored suit reaches for the same silver pen as everyone else, then hands it back and asks for the cheap one. That is not poverty. That is a decision. And it should bother you, because most of us have been trained to do the opposite. We reach for the expensive version first, not because we need it, but because we do not want the room to file us under small. You can feel that impulse in your chest before you can explain it. The watch, the jacket, the restaurant, the car. None of it is only about use. It is about being read correctly. The cruel part is that the audience you're addressing for is often not paying you back. A polished image can win you a glance, a nod, a little respect that evaporates the moment you stop feeding it. That is the hidden trap. Once you start buying the look, you start protecting the look. And the cost is never just money. It is restraint. It is patience. It is the ability to wait without panicking when nobody claps for you. Daniel Kahneman spent a career showing how quickly the mind latches onto a signal and treats it as truth. The same thing happens here. People see the suit, the pen, the surface, and the story begins before they have learned anything real. So ask yourself something uncomfortable. How much of your spending is an attempt to control the first story the room tells about you? Because once that story matters too much, you do not own your image anymore. It owns your decisions. And the strange part is where this gets interesting. One man in the room can hand back the silver pen and change the temperature without saying a word. That is the oldest pressure in the room. You are handed a menu. The table goes quiet for half a second, and suddenly the expensive item does not look like dinner anymore. It looks like proof. You can almost feel the room asking whether you belong here, and your hand moves before your judgment does. So you pick the obvious luxury item. Not because it tastes twice as good. Not because you have thought it through. You pick it because being seen choosing it feels safer than being seen hesitating. That is borrowed shine. You are not buying pleasure at that moment. You are renting an identity for the duration of the meal, hoping the room will read you as larger than you feel. Thorstein Veblen had a name for this over a century ago: conspicuous consumption. The label is plain, but the mechanism is uglier. You spend to make your value visible because invisible value feels too slow. The bill is not just money. It is the fear that if you choose the normal thing, the room will file you under small. Watch how that works in your body. Your pulse changes when the waiter arrives. Your eyes flick once to what the table is ordering. You do not want to be the one who looks unfamiliar with the rules, so you buy the item that keeps you inside the tribe. The meal is over in an hour, but the signal has already done its work. You have traded a private preference for public safety. What exactly did that cost you? Not just the price difference. It cost you honesty. It cost you the chance to sit there as yourself instead of as your performance. And once you get used to paying that price, the habit spreads. You start choosing clothes that speak before you do, venues that announce your taste, objects that tell the room what you are trying to become. The purchase stops being about use. It becomes about being legible. There's a dry joke buried in all of this. The audience you are dressing for is usually too busy dressing itself to remember your name next week. But you still pay. You still carry the burden of being seen correctly by people who may never see you again. That is why borrowed shine is so expensive. It turns insecurity into a recurring expense. The room does not have to know your worth if you keep trying to rent it from them. And that is exactly where the real leverage begins. Cornelius Vanderbilt understood something uglier than elegance. He understood that if you enter a room dressed like money, the room starts pricing you before you speak. That is why the stories about him matter. He would arrive in plain clothes. No performance. No soft edges. And the effect was not embarrassment. It was confusion. The men waiting to measure him lost their footing because they could not decide whether to flatter him, resist him, or dismiss him. Silence made them work harder than he did. What do you do when the man in front of you refuses to give you the costume you were prepared to read? That is the first move. Cheapness strips the room of easy expectations. If you look expensive, people assume you need them to validate the picture. If you look ordinary, you force them to reveal themselves first. Vanderbilt's reputation for ruthless frugality was not just about saving pennies. It was about removing handles. A man who spends like he needs approval becomes easy to steer. A man who looks unimpressive can make other people overreach because they think they have the advantage. He used understatement the way other men use jewelry. Not to express poverty, to create uncertainty. When a rival cannot tell whether you are careless, poor, or deliberately withholding, he starts making mistakes. He talks too much. He explains too much. He offers terms too early. The room begins to leak. And the leak is information. That is the part most people miss. Cheapness, in the right hands, is not a confession. It is a shield. It keeps your intentions private. It keeps your capacity hidden. It keeps other men from building their strategy around your appetite. Vanderbilt did not need the room to admire him. He needed the room to misread him long enough for him to move first. Think about how unnatural that is for most people. They spend to be recognized, then spend again to protect the image they bought. Vanderbilt did the opposite. He accepted the insult of looking smaller if it bought him room to act larger later. That trade is hard for the ego, because the ego wants applause now. Power usually wants silence now and options later. There's a colder lesson inside that plain coat. The person who can tolerate being underestimated controls the tempo. The person who cannot pays for visibility with freedom. And once you see that, you start noticing the bill hidden inside every polished signal. The bill is not always visible on a receipt. In the office, it shows up on your body. You see it in the wool suit that sits too perfectly on a chair in a glass meeting room. You see it in the watch that catches light a little too deliberately when the hand reaches for coffee. You see it at lunch, when the table choice says more than the agenda ever will. Nobody announces rank. They perform it through objects, and the room reads them before a single sentence lands. That is the pressure of the status tax. Once you start dressing for the room starts dressing your mind. You spend extra to look settled. Then you become less settled inside, because every visible upgrade asks for maintenance. You cannot wear the costume and still move with complete freedom. You are busy defending the image. They say, if you want respect, you have to look the part. The weak response is to keep buying proof. The powerful response is to notice what that proof costs you. Because the moment you need the room to approve the signal owns you. Robert Cialdini wrote about social proof, the way people look around to decide what is normal, desirable, or safe. That mechanism is useful in a boardroom and lethal in a weak mind. You walk into an office where expensive shoes, polished watches, and reservation-heavy restaurants have already defined the hierarchy, and suddenly your judgment narrows. You do not just want to belong. You want to avoid being the one who looks out of place. That is when the tax starts collecting. Not from your wallet first. From your patience. From your appetite for risk. From your ability to say no without flinching. And once you are paying that tax, your decisions get easier to steer. A person who needs the room's approval will overexplain, overbuy, overcommit. He will accept bad terms to keep the costume intact. He will chase the visible upgrade because backing away feels like social loss. The office knows this. The office is built on it. The conference room, the steakhouse, the polished leather, the quiet competition over who looks like they already belong. All of it is a machine for making insecurity expensive. The question is ugly, but clean. How much of what you call standards is really fear wearing a nicer coat? You can feel the difference the first time you stop feeding it. The room still judges. The room always judges. But the bill gets lighter when you stop trying to impress the people holding it. The status tax is what you pay when image starts charging interest. Slow down for a second. Let that sit. You already know where this shows up. If this is landing, stay close to this channel. Like and subscribe, and keep your attention where the next turn gets sharper, the moment your image stops serving you and starts owning you. By noon, the founder is sitting in a plain sedan with cloth seats, not because he cannot buy the louder thing, but because he knows what the louder thing does to his day. The car gets him to the office the same way. It just gives fewer strangers permission to start counting. That is the part most men miss. The object is not really the object. It is a mask you wear long enough, and often enough, that the room begins treating you like the version of yourself it can recognize. Then you start acting inside that recognition. You choose differently. You wait less. You protect the image before you protect the work. Inside the office, the same pattern repeats. A plain desk. A basic watch. No trophy details, sitting on the edge of the frame. He walks past the glass walls, and nobody gets a clean read on him, which means nobody gets to set the price of his attention. That is not poverty. That is insulation. This is where self-control stops looking like restraint and starts looking like advantage. Angela Duckworth's work on delayed gratification points to a simple fact. The ability to hold back now changes what you can build later. Not because waiting feels noble, but because waiting keeps your mind from being rented by the present. The loud purchase gives you a burst. The quiet choice gives you time. And time is where the real work happens. While the room is busy noticing, comparing, ranking, you are making decisions in private that do not need applause to survive. You answer emails no one will celebrate. You keep the office unremarkable, so the ambition stays pointed outward, not inward. You let the day pass without feeding the mirror. That is why the Midday Mask is so dangerous. It makes you legible to everyone except yourself. The people around you can guess your priorities from the signal. You have to live with the consequences. Take a breath here. The point is not that plain things are holy. Some plain things are just plain. The point is that when you stop performing for midday attention, you recover the one asset status spending always steals: room to wait. Wealth grows best when nobody is clapping. What you let look ordinary may be the exact thing protecting your future. That is the part most rooms miss. The expensive thing is loud. The valuable thing is often just a quiet receipt no one bothered to read. Vanderbilt understood that, not as theory. In the room, in the pause, in the small act that looked like nothing, he reaches for the cheaper pen, and the room does what rooms always do when they think they have you sorted. They relax their estimate of you. They think they have measured the man by the object in his hand. They have not. That is the whole trick. Looking cheap can be a cover for options. It tells the room less than it wants, which means the room has less to grab. You are harder to pressure when your life is not decorated for inspection. Morgan Housel says wealth is what you do not see, and that is not a slogan. It is a warning. The money that goes into the display is money that is no longer available for patience, for silence, for waiting on the better opening. You can feel the difference in a meeting. One person arrives wearing their decisions on the outside, and every glance at them becomes a negotiation. Another sits there almost blank, and the room keeps talking, keeps revealing itself, keeps overcommitting. Which one has more room to move when the real decision comes? The one already understood, or the one still underestimated? That is why restraint is not always a sign of lack. Sometimes it is a signal that you are protecting invisible capital. You are not advertising every resource you have, because advertised resources become contested resources. The man who looks easy to read is often the easiest to steer. The man who leaves the room uncertain keeps the future open. And there is a cold comfort in that. You do not need to win the room's applause to keep your leverage intact. In fact, applause can be expensive. It asks you to keep wearing the costume after the scene has ended. So the cheap pen is not the point. The point is the distance it creates between what the room expects and what you can still do. That distance is luxury. That is the part almost nobody wants to admit, The room does not have to admire you for you to be in control of it. Sometimes the colder move is the smaller one. Sometimes the cheaper object is the one that keeps your mind unclaimed. You can feel the cost, though. Looking restrained means you will be misread. It means some people will assume you are less serious, less successful, less dangerous than you are. That sting is real. But if you need to be recognized before you can act, you are already paying rent to the audience. So ask yourself something sharp enough to hurt. Are you spending to be seen? Or are you staying invisible long enough to keep leverage? Vanderbilt understood the difference. The suit was immaculate. The pen was not the point. The room thought it was watching a man choose cheapness. It was watching a man refuse extraction. That is the colder identity. Not poverty. Not stinginess. Control over what the room gets to take from you before you have even decided to give it. And there's a deeper question underneath that, one most men never reach until the bill comes due. What exactly are you buying when you buy approval? If this kind of money psychology sharpens you, stay here. Subscribe, and keep your attention on the rooms that try to price you before you speak.